Thank you all for being here. I don't want us to get too far behind schedule, so we'll go ahead and get started. Once again, if you missed my little intro, my name's Bianca. I am a community engagement specialist with the Development Services Department, Austin Development Services, as we're now called. And I'll just be our hostess for today, getting us started. Today, we're going to be talking about Chapter 3 of the National Electrical Code. And Marty's our expert on deck, and he's going to run us through some of the changes we've had a couple sessions prior. If you missed those, you can go to the Austin Development Services public meetings page, and there's a section that says code changes, and there you can see any of the previous recordings, and then we'll be having more sessions in the coming weeks. So thank you all for being here. Today's session is just going to be that presentation with Marty, and then we'll switch over to Q&A. So if while Marty is presenting to us, you have questions coming up that you don't want to forget your question, if you look at the bottom of your screen, you might have to click around a little bit. There's a Q&A option, and that's where you can put your questions in, and we'll read those at the end. And then we'll also prompt you that if you prefer, you can raise your hand and ask your question verbally. So um, we'll go ahead and turn it over to Marty.
All right. Thank you, Bianca. So welcome, Marty Starrett, Division Manager, Commercial Building Inspections. If you've been here before, thank you for attending. If this is your first time, a few things I need to go over. I will try to capture as many changes as I can, but I may miss a few. And I will not be covering any of the medium voltage articles or some of the subtle changes. You will not receive any continuing education credits. This presentation is only informational. And as Bianca said, hopefully we'll have some time at the end for questions or comments. Next slide. So today we're going to be looking at the changes coming up in the 2026 National Electric Code in Chapter 3. That's your wiring methods and materials. Next slide. Article 300, your general requirements for wiring methods and materials. These will be the changes. So Article 400.4C, limitations, damaged conductors, and wiring methods. The new article on the requirements for replacing damaged conductor no longer suitable for use. It identifies overheating, fire, corrosion, and water as damage factors. They've also have some informational notes. If you have any questions or anything on any of the conductors or equipment, you can those NEMA manuals that are highlighted in the informational note. You can go to them and it'll tell you kind of if it needs to be replaced or most of them do. But now we've actually got a code requirement that'll make it enforceable for the inspectors. Next slide. Article 300.6E, protection against physical damage, wiring methods, material in or under roof decking. The revision has added all types of roof decking, not just metal corrugated. Those of you are familiar with the 23 code or 20 code that you have to maintain an inch and a half below a metal corrugated roof. Now in the 26, it'll be all types of roof decking, such as like a residential. You have a plywood. You'll have to keep that those raceways uh, inch and a half below that. There is a new exception for electrical wiring encased in at least 2 inches of concrete in concealed locations. And also there's always the exception for rigid and intermediate metal conduit That still is in the 2026. Next slide. Article 307D3, underground installations, protection from damage, service conductors, and raceway. The revised article now includes service conductors in raceways. As you know, the current 2023 and previous versions only talked about service cables. You had to put the the warning ribbon above these ditches that had these service conductors. Now in 2026, uh, if the service conductors are installed in a raceway, even you're going to have to use that warning ribbon. Next slide. Article 300.9A, raceways exposed to different temperatures, condensation. Revision to add item number 2 to permit listed fittings or other approved methods to prevent condensation in raceways. An example of what they've added would be something like a thermal brake coupling. Uh, Typically, whenever you go from from a cold temperature to a hot temperature, uh, 23, you had to seal that. But now they've actually added another method in these thermal brake couplings. Next slide. Article 311B, raceways and wet locations above grade drainage. A new article requiring raceways to drain when installed in a wet location above grade. This would be interior and exterior. So if you have a wet location on the inside of a building, those raceways will have to be installed so they can drain. Next slide. Okay, this is a kind of not a big one, but you're really going to have to pay attention. Those of you that use cable ties for securing and supporting. So Article 300.13E, securing and supporting, the new subdivision and informational note to utilize the new terms for cable ties and cable tie fixing device. If you were with me in the chapter 1, those were new definitions added to Article 100. So just just whenever you read this article, it tells you that the cable ties, if you're using it for cables and raceways, they'll have to be uh, they'll have to be uh, listed for securing and supporting. If you notice, I've got 3 different types of cables here. There's that type 21S. That's only good for securing. Type 21S also, there's another kind that, excuse me, the first one is 21S. That should be type 21. It's only good for securing. The middle one, type 21S, is for securing and supporting. And then, of course, you got type AH2 for plenum, excuse me, rated. Give me 1 second. I think we're having an audio issue here. Let me see if that helps. Hopefully
Oh,
that'll help.
Marty, I think you're all right. I was just checking with the audience, and I think this may be just unique to one participant.
Oh,
You sound
okay.
good. You sound good to me.
I was seeing chats come through. That's why I was asking. Anyway, what I'm trying to tell you with this new article is, if you use cable ties for securing and supporting, you're really going to have to watch what you purchase. Uh, you're going to have to pay attention to the listing. As we've already talked about in the last 2 sessions, there's a lot more listing requirements in the 2026 code. Next slide. Article 317, boxes, conduit bodies, or fittings where required. The revised article clarifies where a fitting in lieu of a box is required. Section F states if it's used as a pull point, the fitting must be accessible. Before I get into that, I wanted to show you a couple examples that I have on the slide here. The one on the left is, I have to say, I've been an electrician now for 40 plus years, and previously, back in the old days, that what you see on the left was kind of a normal thing. You would take an EMT connector and go to a rigid coupling, and then maybe to an MC cable connector or a Romex connector. But that is not allowed. You have to use a fitting that's listed for the purpose. So if you're looking at the one on the right, that's a listed fitting that's doing the same thing as the one on the left. Next slide. So if you have a pull point in a raceway, you're gonna you if you got to have access to it, like the one on the right, that 90-degree flex fitting, you're going to have that's going to have to be accessible. The one on the left, since there's no pull point, you will not have to have accessibility to that fitting. Next slide. Article 320B, raceway installations welding. The revision clarifies that welding of electrical raceways is not allowed. Be honest with you, I thought this was I mean, you weren't allowed to do it for years, but apparently there was a little note in there that if like an engineer could determine that it could be done or whatever, that you could do that. But they specifically clarify it now. You cannot weld raceways at all. Can't even weld them as a support method. Next slide. Article 324, bends. The new article clarifying that the 360-degree bend requirement applies even when you transition to another type of conduit or tubing. So you'll really have to watch this if you go from like EMT to flexible metallic conduit. You'll have to look at your bends. You will not be able to have more than 360 degrees between two boxes. Next slide. All right, now we're going to get into Article 310. That's conductors for general wiring. So Article 310.5A, conductors, minimum size of conductors. We have a new minimum size now in the National Electrical Code. It'll be 16 copper. If you were with me on Friday, that we talked about that 10 amp branch circuit, you'll be able to use that 16 copper or the 14 gauge copper clad aluminum for those types of circuits. Next slide. Article 314A2, ampacities for conductors rated 0 volts to 2000 volts, general selection of ampacities. So the exception to this article has been rewritten as a list and clarified. It now clearly states that the higher ampacity can only be used when differences are caused by ambient temperature or the number of current carrying conductors. The part of the circuit with the lower ampacity still cannot be longer than 10 feet or 10% of the total circuit length. So most of you are familiar with doing ampacity when you do adjustments. If you've got a certain section that's like that's in an ambient temperature area, or there's more than 3 current carrying conductors, typically you would have to do those adjustments along the entire length of the circuit. But if that particular area where that occurs is not longer than 10 feet or 10% of the total circuit length, then you don't have to do the ambient temperatures for the whole circuit. And now, if it goes beyond that 10 feet or more than 10% of the total circuit length, you will. So we got a little help here when it comes to those adjustments. Next slide. Article 31015E, ampacity tables, neutral conductor. The revised to reorganize the text related to when a neutral conductor is counted as a current carrying conductor for clarity. I'll be honest with you, this new revision, the way they make it look, it's clarified it for me. I know throughout the years I've always had a little issue when it comes to this particular article here, but now in the 26 is going to make it easier to understand. Good code change. Article 312, cabinet cutout boxes and meter socket enclosures. Next slide. Article 312.3B, reconditioned equipment not permitted to be installed. As we've been talking the last two sessions, that dot three, that's your reconditioned equipment, pretty much what is in every article that has that reconditioned equipment requirement. This one says that you're not permitted to use reconditioned cabinets, cabinet cutout boxes, or cabinet meter socket enclosures. Next slide. Article 312.11A, splices, taps, and feed-through conductors. This is a big change if you do a lot of these generator installations on existing dwellings. I know because of the way it works out on some of these houses that you have to put in the transfer switch to for the entire house generator for protection. You've been able to run the load side conductors off of the meter through the existing panel to the new service rated transfer switch, but you cannot do that in 2026 because the revision was service conductors are to be located within service equipment that was added to the required conditions. So you will not be able to run those service conductors through that existing panel in the 2026. You will have to reconfigure your installation to go from the meter over to the transfer switch, and then from the transfer switch back to the existing panel. So you really have to watch that if you do this type of installation. Next slide. Okay, Article 314, that's outlet, device pull, and junction boxes, conduit bodies, fittings, and handhold enclosures. Next slide. Article 314.16B, the number of conductors in an outlet device junction box fill calculations. The revision added splicing connectors to the existing items that are not included in box fill calculations. So they did this revision to emphasize that you do not count these whenever you're doing your box fill calculations. Next slide. Another clarifying one in Article 314.22, surface extensions. The revision specifically allows surface extensions. I know some of the inspectors over the years have probably had an issue. You know, they keep adding on to boxes, but the new 26 code, it actually says you can do it. Just got to watch your grounding and bonding if you choose to keep adding multiple surface extensions. Next slide. I think this is a pretty good one myself. 314.23E supports for boxes and conduit bodies. This one here is raceway supported enclosures without devices or luminaires. So it'd just be like if you had a box, like a junction box, no receptacles or no lights attached to it. So the revised exception added FS or FD single gang box or explosion proof box to what is allowed to be supported by a single raceway. So if you look at the particular kinds of raceways that I've got on the slide here, the intermediate metal conduit, rigid metal conduit, number 3 stands out, rigid PVC. So what that means is if you've got a FS box that's not got a receptacle or a luminaire on it, that you could support that box with a rigid PVC conduit or raceway. So that's a pretty big exception there. Next slide. Now, if you have the same scenario, Article 314.23F would be raceway supported enclosures with devices or luminaire. So the same revision, they added the FS or FD single gang device box or explosion proof box to what is allowed to be supported by a single raceway, but you can only use IMC or rigid metallic conduit. So you can have it like what the picture shows, you can have an FS box with the receptacle, but it can, if it's a single raceway support, then it has to be either IMC uh, or rigid. Next slide. This is my most favorite code change of 2026. As inspector, the current code requirements, it was kind of difficult to well, it wasn't difficult to enforce, but it was kind of one of those things like, oh man, I hate doing this. I hate failing people for it. But now we've got it clarified and it's exactly the way it needs to be to me. Article 314.27B2, boxes at ceiling suspended paddle fan outlets. The new required locations for ceiling fan boxes is either one, centrally in ceilings or living and sleeping areas, or two, at locations where indicated by the installer, designer, or building owner. If you were not familiar with what's currently in the code, the ceiling fan boxes are required in habitable rooms where you could put a ceiling fan. What that means is if I've got a kitchen, if I've got lights over a kitchen island, even those are places that typically you would not see a ceiling fan, but current code, I'd have to put a ceiling fan rated box in those areas. The new 2026 code, I think it gets it right. You're just going to be putting these boxes in the living and sleeping area. That's where most people have their fans in a dwelling unit. Or hey, if the owner wants to put a fan in the dining room, then you would have to have a box there, but not every box in every room of a house. Next slide. All right, this is what I'm going to talk about now is generally for all the cable articles. It's a couple changes that kind of is in each cable article. I didn't want to go in each one of them and say the same thing, so it's kind of generally over all of them. Next slide. All right, the listing requirements. Electricians are really going to have to pay attention to the listing requirements, and like I've said it before in all pretty much all the articles, especially in the cable articles. The revisions add new listing requirements for support and securement hardware. So whatever cable you're going to be installing, like MC cable or NM cable, Romex, you're going to have to make sure that ever how you're supporting and securing those cables, that the whatever you're using is listed. That could be a staple or a one hole strap or whatever. But I threw a few examples in here. On the left is a cable tie. You'll have to verify that whatever cable tie you're using is good for whatever you're installing. The center picture, I have seen electricians in this town try to use rebar tie wire to tie off MC cable. You're going to have to show me the listing that's going to be allowed, or that the listing allows that. I have a feeling you probably will not be able to. And then there's a rack for Romex NM cable. You just want to verify that it's listed for secure and support and securement hardware. Next slide. And then in most all the articles, because of Article 314, the minimum size conductor, uh, we've added that 14 gauge copper clad aluminum conductor. So pretty much all the articles now, the cable articles in .104 conductors have added this to allowable size. That'd be your MC cable, NM cable, SC cable, TC cable. So you can use 14 gauge copper clad aluminum conductors in those particular articles. Next slide. Article 330, metal clad type MC cable. Next slide. In uses permitted, 330.10, revision restored the language to item 11 to ensure that metal armor is protected from deterioration in damp and wet locations. They've added an exception to that for copper alloy covered cable is not required to have the jacket. Here's a good one. Article 330A, securing and support in general. A revision has added cable cleats as an approved method for securing and supporting type MC cable. A lot of people have been using these for, like other cables, but now you'll be able to use them for type TC cable, a cable cleat. Next slide. Article 332, mineral insulated metal sheath cable type MI. Next slide. For securing and supporting, Article 332.30, the revision eliminates staples as an accepted support method. It also allows the AHJs to approve alternate means that meet performance and safety standards. So you will not be able to use staples to support MI cable. Article 334, non-metallic sheath cable types NM and NMC. Next slide. Article 334.10, uses permitted. The revision added an exception to allow NM cable to be installed without the 15-minute thermal barrier in non-habitable grade level storage garages and buildings under 1,500 square feet. I will say electricians will need to watch that. You cannot put NM cable where areas are subject to physical damage. Sometimes these little garages, for tool storage or tools, they might actually damage the cable. But the new code, you do not have to have the 15-minute thermal barrier. Next slide. Article 334.12, uses not permitted. They added a clarification to specify that NM and MNC type cables are not permitted for direct burial. Uh, I always thought this for years, but I guess it wasn't never really specified in the code. There was probably some little discussions amongst installers and inspectors, and so they actually put it in the code. It says you cannot direct bury NM or NMC type cables. No, no digging Romex underground. Next slide. A few changes to the bending radius, 334.24. A revision was added for flat cables when bending on the flat side. The minor diameter dimension shall be used to determine the bending radius. All other cables, the major shall be used. If you do not know, the bending radius on a Romex is 5 times the diameter of the cable. So they give you a little bit more uh, bending radius on the flat cables than on a non-flat cable. Next slide. Article 338, service interest cable. This will be types SE and USE. Next slide. Same thing, just as just discussed in the NM and NMC article. Same thing in the SC and USC article. The revision to 338.24 bending radius. It was added for flat cables. The minor diameter dimension shall be used to determine the bending radius. All other cables, the major, shall be used. Again, 5 times the diameter size of the cable. Next slide. Article 342, intermediate metal conduit, IMC. Next slide. Dot 10B, use permitted corrosion environments. A new informational note was included to provide examples of corrosion protected wiring methods. These two are galvanized steel and PVC coated steel. Next slide. Article 342.14, dissimilar metals. This is the same article that's also in rigid metal conduit 344.14. I'm kind of doing two birds with one stone here. A new list item 5 is added to permit the use of identified bimetallic couplings as a method to prevent galvanic corrosion when joining dissimilar methods. So they've added these to both the dot 14 articles in intermediate metal and rigid metal conduits. Next slide. Article 342.29, paired lock nuts. Again, this is the same article that's in rigid metal conduit 344.29. A new section is added requiring the use of paired lock nuts when terminating through non-threaded openings. Again, this is similar to the bearing of the Romex cable. I guess it really wasn't spelled out in the code that you had to have 2 lock nuts on either side of an enclosure or equipment, but they actually spell it out now. So there could be no discussions between the inspector and the installer on this item. There you go. Thank you. Article 342.42, couplings and connectors. It's the same in rigid metal conduit 344.42. Again, here's another one. The revision requires all couplings and connectors to be made tight. So it actually has to spell it out. We've always known this, but it wasn't really, I guess, clear enough in the code. Now it will be. They have to be made tight. Article 352, rigid polyvinyl chloride conduit, PVC. Next slide. On 352.20B, maximum size, the new exception to allow for sizes larger than number 6 if conditions are met, and the condition is underground. So you can actually go larger than number 6 PVC underground. Next slide. Cable trays, Article 392. Article 392 18F, cable tray installation access. The revision introduces a new requirement for at least 12 inches of access clearance above cable trays. They needed this one. There are 4 exceptions, though, were added that provides flexibility in specialized environments, such as areas within limited space and IT rooms. I will say that also one of those exceptions is where you got an industrial type uh, 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 place where you've got continuous maintenance. They you can actually go less than that, but this was a good one. Next slide. Article 392.22B, number of conductors cables, number of single conductor cables rated 2,000 volts or less in cable trays. The revision removes the unenforceable requirements that single conductor cables be evenly distributed across the cable tray, and they also added the use of copper clad conductors. So there was already a requirement in the code, but it was unenforceable. So they've actually cleaned this up to help with that. Next slide. Article 393, low voltage suspended ceiling power distribution systems. In Article 393, 14A, installation general requirements. The revision removed the phrase installed in a neat and workmanlike manner, and they included new language that requires a qualified person to install all components of the system. So you'll have to be qualified, trained to install these particular types of systems. All right, so that's pretty much the changes for Chapter 3. Uh, Looking ahead, I'll be doing the Chapter 4 changes on Friday. If you need additional resources, there's a lot of stuff that's available on YouTube. Ryan Jackson is a good one. He's doing 100 days of 100 code changes on his. The IEI has got some stuff on their web channel too for code changes. And then also the National Electric Code itself has those. So I would recommend if you need any further information on the ones I went over today, you might look at those or maybe even read up on some of the articles that some of the trade magazines put out. And with that, I'll give it to Bianca. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Marty. I've learned a lot. The detail, my goodness. Y'all are definitely professionals here. Thank you for being with us. Thanks for the presentation, Marty. I've got one question so far in our Q&A bank, and I'd like to remind everyone that now's the time. If you have a question, click on the bottom of your screen and type it into the Q&A box, or you can use at the bottom of your hand, there's a raise hand function, and you can just ask your question out loud. I'll let you know when it's your turn. But to get us started, I'll read the first question we've got from Dan. It says, regarding 314.23E, possibly slide 26. I'm going to try and go back to that. Let's see. We've covered a lot of ground. They are speaking of Schedule 80 PVC for support and not Schedule 40. Is that correct? Let's see, we said slide 26.
Uh, so
I don't think that's the one.
Dan, I don't believe they actually call out the Schedule 80 or the Schedule 40. I think they just say rigid PVC. I'll have to find out additionally on that for you, but I don't think they actually call out which schedule to use. I think what Dan is talking about here, typically Schedule 80 conduit is used for areas of subject to physical damage. Um, and I think what he's thinking about this, I would think the same thing probably is typically you see these installations in an area that possibly could be subject to physical damage, but I don't believe I can't answer that right today. I'll have to get back on that, but I do not think they actually call out what schedule you have to use. I think it just says rigid PVC.
Okay. So this is the correct slide we're looking at.
Yes, that's it.
Okay. Great. I will pin this and we should be able to get that answer, that response. We'll be able to send that back out to the attendees today once we double check on it. Thank you. Any other questions from anyone today? That's all I've got in the box, so I'll wait and see if anyone's hand goes up or if anything else comes through. But hang on with us for just one other minute. I would like to ask you if you could go ahead and take the survey and let us know what you thought about today's presentation. And then I think this might be where you can register for the future classes in this series if you want to follow those QR codes. Say, does anyone know do you know, Marty, when's the next class for this?
Yes, it'll be this coming up Friday, Friday the 15th. Same
Yeah,
time, same bat channel. We'll be looking at chapter 4.
sounds good. Well, thanks everyone for being here. We really appreciate your time and enjoy connecting with you. Just a reminder, if you'd like to stay involved with other things that Austin Development Services is doing, or just know anything related to Austin Development Services in connection to the city, we've got our Building Connections newsletter for all of our stakeholders. And of course, we've got social media channels, or you can always visit our website, developmentatx.com. And we'll catch you on Friday then. And thanks everyone for being here.
Right.
And thank you, Marty.
All right. Thank y'all. Appreciate it. Thank you, Bianca.
Thank you.